While the world's been waiting, we've been working. We've expanded to over 3 million square feet of studio space, introduced world-class safety measures, and our new Ontario Green Screen program will ensure a more sustainable future. We are Ontario, and we're ready to roll.
It's very, very important that we put the stories in the hands of the people who own those stories.
Classic stories, good stories, original stories are always going to have high value.
Good filmmaking requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage, and that's just what we do.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Windows to the World, from Art House to your house. We're excited to invite you to our new Bell Digital Talk Cinema. This will be the home of our 2020 industry conference, which includes masterclasses, dialogues, perspectives, micro-sessions, and spotlights. You'll hear from speakers from around the world who are transforming our industry to make it more sustainable and inclusive, as well as a hub for original storytelling. The conversation will be available on TIFF Digital Cinema Pro tomorrow for any colleagues who may have missed it. I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsor, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, and our major industry supporters, Telefilm Canada and Ontario Creates. This session is presented by Telefilm Canada in collaboration with the European Film Promotion Group, so please enjoy Windows to the World, from Art House to your house.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here on this lovely morning. So our panel, From the Art House to Your House, will explore how distributors, exhibitors, and festivals have survived during the pandemic, and whether they've had to turn to new models to maintain a sustainable business. Now, the first person on our panel is Damian Spandley. Damian is the Director of Program at Curzon in the UK. Curzon is one of the top independent distributors in the world, and they do it all. They also are exhibitors, they own 2 cinemas, and have been expanding and have an expanding on-demand service. And I think it's actually made them quite nimble during this time, so we're really interested to hear from you, Damian. Next on the panel is Tori Baker. Tori is the president and CEO of the Salt Lake Film Society and the co-founder of a new venture, At Home Arts, a new virtual cinema platform in the USA. As an exhibitor, Tori and her team also foster film talent, cultivate film appreciation within our community. And next is Robin Smith, who is a fellow Canadian. He is the founder of KinoSmith, which is one of our most exciting and successful boutique distributors. KinoSmith has released over 300 feature films within the first 7 years of operation, so it's really very interesting to hear how he has managed during the lockdown. And then we have Nicolas Robert, who is a partner and sales agent at the Playtime Group. Playtime is a company known for the quality of artistic choices, its dedication to the content, and Playtime is also very director-driven, seeking out and working with some of the most exciting directors out there. And last but certainly not least is John Nine, who is a senior programmer at the Sundance Film Festival. John has worked at Sundance since 2001, programming primarily American and international films. John curates films as well and hosts the popular film culture conversation series, Lost and Found at the Movies, in his hometown of LA. So everyone, welcome. So why don't we jump in? Let's start with this little global pandemic. So briefly, just tell us what is your distribution model, your normal business, and how you've had to adapt during COVID, with a focus particularly on sort of the virtual cinema or the theatrical on demand. So I guess we can start with Damian.
Oh, hi there. Great to be here. So Curzon are in the UK an 85-year-old cinema exhibitor, and we are a 45-plus-year-old film distribution company. And we also have, we are integrated company. We also have Curzon Home Cinema, which is an on-demand platform. Our model prior to lockdown was to release around 20 to 25 titles a year, acquired for our cinemas and for our home entertainment platform. And we've been big supporters of the day and date releasing model. We like to see films play in our cinemas on the same day as they play on our on-demand platform, and that's principally our model. So we had to adjust, obviously, fairly quickly when lockdown came in the UK in mid-March, because we had to close our circuit of 13 physical venues. And we had, I think, first weekend of lockdown, we were planning to release the Curator movie, The Truth, in cinemas and on Curzon Home Cinema. And so we were able to quickly get approvals from the sales agent and producers to go with a digital-only release. And that's been the principle of our model during lockdown. While cinemas were closed, our online theatre, which is how we treat Curzon Home Cinema, remained open. And we were able to we had a slate of 5 theatrical releases, and all 5 of them we were able to convert for digital-only releases. But we were also able to persuade a number of third-party distributors to join us, and also eventually we went out back into the market to acquire films for our platform. And we became, during lockdown in the UK, we became the sort of like the theatrical entity for independent distribution to still get their films into the market. And we saw a fantastic surge in numbers through the platform as a result.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we go to you, Robin, because you've done some new innovative stuff.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for inviting me to this. Yeah, here in Canada, where we're based, everything locked down on March 13th. Our company, KinoSmith, and I should note that I also run a company called Blue Ice Docs, which is a financing distribution company as well. We had literally 3 releases set for theaters, and our model is very much a theatrical model. We go after documentaries, nonfiction product, feature length, and we give every film a theatrical release. So when theaters closed down on March 13th, we literally had a film called The Booksellers that opened on March 10th that we had to pull off screen. We had 2 other releases set up for 2 weeks later that we had to delay and cancel. We decided to sort of follow a model that individuals in the States had done, like Brigaud-Robert and Film Movement, and set up our own on-demand cinema. I hate the term virtual cinema, by the way. We were the first Canadian company to sort of set that up. We reached out to all the independent cinemas across the country, enlisted about 50 of them, including actually independent film festivals, and helped them engage with some of the product that we had. We also solicited our platform to other distributors and third parties, and had a few involved, and now we're sort of branching out into the US with the US partner shortly on using our platform as well. It's not what it used to be with theatrical by any means, but it helped us still activate our audiences. It helped us entrench our relationships with the independent exhibitors, and hopefully that sort of buys some goodwill down the road when things hopefully get better.
Okay, great. Tori, again, you're from the US and you've also adopted some new models.
Yes, the Salt Lake Film Society is actually a nonprofit cinema organization. So we operate 2 art house cinemas and 7 screens. Our core model was definitely a film exhibition. We were not on the distribution side. So when this crisis happened, we took our community projects, some of those continued, but when it came to the theaters, we needed to pivot. And I knew that we needed to pivot to virtual. The question was, how do we do that? I was lucky enough internally to have an expert on staff by the name of Miles Romney, who could help us build technology that would ease the pain points of virtual theatrical from the exhibitor's perspective, as well as ease some of the things that we didn't perceive would happen down the line on the distributor side. So we created that technology in 2 weeks, and with 2 cinemas in the US, us and the Coolidge Corner cinemas in Massachusetts, we launched that on April 3rd, tested it for 3 months, and then expanded out to a dozen theaters.
Okay. And I guess, Nicolas, I mean, you're a sales agent primarily. You know, can you speak on this as well? You know, what did you guys have to do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here as well. I'm honored to be amongst my peers here and people I know and I respect. International sales have been struggling, obviously, with this pandemic, since our job is to have movies circulate around the world. As you can imagine, it's been a rough time. So the way I think a lot of us pivoted, as I think it's a key word here, was to play along with our buyers or distributors. And Damian mentioned this. We played along. We helped them do a day and date or forego the theatrical release and authorize them to go directly on digital and give them the means also to do so as quickly as possible. So we were reactive, I think, with our partners around the world on that. And second was the question of festivals. Since we are, for our launch and our marketing, very festival dependent. And there again, I think several festivals were able to turn around and pivot quite quickly. Some of them not as quickly, but we also played along that game. And namely Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival went online. We brought our talents. We did events. We did Q&As with the actors. We brought them into virtual rooms where people would be able to interact with them. It's not as good as a red carpet for sure, but I think we were managed to cover part of the downside, let's say, in this way. So both with our partners, distributors abroad, and with our festival that were happening between March and now.
Okay, great. John, you guys didn't really have to pivot so much this year because you were very lucky. I mean, Sundance happened before the pandemic shut things down. So what have you been doing? What has Sundance been doing? And are you modifying the festival in any way to come?
Yeah, we were lucky in the sense that we had the festival as we recognize it every year. And then it became quickly apparent in our planning, which usually starts in February, that the next edition would not be in the same form, and that we would have to start doing some scenario planning, which, you sort of see it as it's a good thing that we had a lot of time and that we've had a lot of time. And at the same time, because there's so much uncertainty, you really end up planning. You're planning 6 different scenarios or 8 different scenarios because it's not remotely clear what January will look like. And so March, April, May, June, as you go through the months, you're sort of I guess directing yourself towards one or more scenarios that are more probable. But we had to we realized that it wasn't going to be the same, and that we were paying a lot of attention to what other festivals were doing, and we were also talking a lot with all of the people for whom the festival plays a role. So that's obviously the artist community and producers. It's the industry. It's companies like Nicolas's and the sales companies in the world, and it's also arts organizations across the U.S. So the early spring was really a question of almost
listening a lot to what was happening in the community and sort of asking ourselves questions about how the festival could be responsive to that, because obviously that's one of a festival is always responsive to what's happening in the ecosystem of independent film, and this is just a very pronounced instance of that. But I think the way that we looked at it, and of course it coincides with Tabitha Jackson taking over the role of the festival director, so of course I'm sure she was very excited to begin her tenure with a global pandemic. But I will say that, I think what we all sort of agreed on and even were excited about was how would we look at the festival and its changed form, not as a retreat and a sort of relegation, but sort of to ask, are there ways in which how we pivot become a reflection of our values? And I'm thinking about things specifically like accessibility. Park City is not necessarily an easy or cheap place to come. And so we started asking questions about what does it look like to almost take the license of these new circumstances and turn Sundance into something that reflects our values in a way that could be exciting. So there are a lot of very specific ways in which we're thinking about that, but in a general sense, it's to sort of try to find the advantages that come from having to change the form of the festival.
Okay. So it seems to me that sort of a reliance on virtual cinema or theatrical on demand is sort of become the pivot during the pandemic. So I guess one thing is how with festivals and theatrical releasing playing such a huge role in the marketing strategy of independent films, is the release process on digital the same? Is it sort of still a one size fit all thing? Or are you looking at films case by case? How are you looking at the films themselves and getting the word out? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I think from our point of view, the marketing around the films is very different. I mean, there's no use spending money on outdoor advertising when everyone is staying at home. So we shifted our advertising spends online, and from that sense, we were able to create bespoke campaigns around each particular film that really sort of was very highly targeted and gave us a lot of analytical data that we could work with and respond to the point where only a few weeks into the release, we were talking to third-party distributors and sharing some of our insights on how they might be able to also tailor their campaigns. And I thought that was particularly interesting. And also in terms of publicity, we found in lockdown, so this is not usually the case when the theaters are open, but we found that the industry press responded really well to the situation and the fact that theatrical movies were going online and people were accessing new releases in the home, to the point where the national reviewers were reviewing films that were being released digitally only on a Friday when all of the national reviews come out. But also the industry and the film press were also reacting to not so much data as they would box office data, because we're still far more secretive with that information, but they were responding to trends and rewriting about how films were doing. So basically digital became sort of like the new theatrical, which was really interesting. We also were getting great reviews as well. We joked about the star of COVID. Obviously, pandemic is not something to joke about, but we were getting extra stars and really great reviews for our films, and that was pushing people online to watch films as well. And it was a really nice reminder that of an important role that the critics have to play.
Yeah. How about you, Tori? I mean, with this collective that you've put together in some ways.
Yeah, I think the power of the art house is that they know their audience, right? So that leverages anything that the distributors are doing in order to really access them. There's a loyalty there that really belongs to them in a way that it doesn't to, larger corporations. But when we're talking about the theatrical exhibition space and our audiences, what we tried to create with At Home Arts was the support for the ideas and the mechanisms that going to the movies was. So it was reinforcing showtimes, reinforcing opening on the weekend, reinforcing a Friday and Saturday night viewing experience, which we've shown statistically is when people are going to watch when it comes to our gateway, having that box office gateway so that they're actually attending my theater or my peer's theater who's part of the cohort. So it's about that loyalty and that engagement and taking just the technology that's available and harnessing it in a way that supports the big screen experience, even though we're all experiencing this virtually at this time. So that not only will they'll come back to our actual theaters, but that we can possibly do maybe what Curzon's done, which is augment our bricks and mortar theaters with a virtual screen so that we can now serve what might be an emerging demographic that has a new need, which is they don't feel safe going out, or they don't think that they can go out for medical reasons. So that virtual screen will continue to be important on a mission level to art houses as well.
Robin?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all that. I don't mean to sort of keep jumping in and telling extra jobs, but one of the other things I do is also program the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema here in Toronto, which, like all cinemas, closed down when the pandemic started. They also went virtual on demand, and similarly, as going forward, now that the cinema is going to open in October, we are going to keep the on-demand side open. For exactly the reasons that Laurie had mentioned, which is, making sure that audiences have that option of either going in person or attending virtually. I'm going to use that word virtually, even though I don't want to. And I think that's really important. And I think that's really encouraging for audiences and the demographics for audiences to build. I mean, in Canada, can't speak for the rest of the world. I mean, art house cinema does skew theatrically to an older audience, which, as we know, are not the most tech savvy. But by offering a different type of programming now, which is part of our now conscious on what we're looking at, it's not just what films are going to work for the big screen, but what films may work for a digital smaller screen as well. We do have the opportunity of reaching out to a larger audience now. And that's not just with Hot Docs, that's with all the independent cinemas across the country. And that is also, once again, the beauty of what, I don't want to say that anything great came out of this crisis, but I mean, the one thing that I think everyone has really been listening to is the audiences and their needs and wants. And seeing all the independent art houses across the country struggle, but then sort of embrace who their audience is and how to communicate to them, and really listening to what they want and how they want to consume entertainment product, I think is really important. And I see from the data that we get in on what cinemas are doing an excellent job of doing that outreach and pivoting or adapting. And then sadly, you're seeing some of the ones that aren't, and that to me is a real telling scenario, and hopefully something for all art house owners to learn from going forward is maybe our patronage, our community, our brand loyalty is not as strong as what it should be. And we should start moving forward and start consolidating that. Whether or not you're actually doing online screenings or not, I think it's a real great exercise to understand who your audience is and how they want to watch movies.
Okay, but are all films suited for this on-demand, this virtual cinema? Like Nicolas, for example, as a sales agent, are you thinking about or modifying the kinds of films you're seeking because of this new emerging model? And would you even say that this is a new emerging model that's here to stay?
Well, I'm going to be maybe the grain of salt here, because I might not be completely convinced by the model. And of course, the question of brand loyalty and curating a program, a movie theater, and having a faithful audience is something a dream for a cinema owner. And I do own 2 screens in Paris myself, so I'm not completely outside of that reflected. I do have that problem as well. Obviously, in the center of Paris, 2 screens, an art house theater. We do want to know who's coming and have people come back. The basic of retail. But if we're completely, and as a sales agent here, if we're completely honest with ourselves as cinema owners or as distributors, what is the biggest revenue model? Is it trying to create those brands that make Curzon has a brand. I don't deny it at all, and it's maybe, as you said, Jennifer, from the outstart, it's quite unique. But most cinemas, most art house cinemas, are just programming movies. People go see the movies. They don't go to the theater per se. They go see the movies, and including mine. And my question is, are we really going to create that many sub-mini brands for people to go see their movies on digital? Or, as a sales agent, will I maximize my return for myself and the talents by doing the type of deals Universal did, for instance, with AMC, where they are using basically a VOD system that has their brand, that has following, that has specific ways to communicate and to promote movies digitally, and revert some in some type of model, some revenue to the theaters. Better model. Is it a model where each one recognizes their strengths and weaknesses, and VOD?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I actually put it out to you guys.
I would say that in the U.S., there's definitely a difference between the art house world, of which about 80% are nonprofit organizations, meaning that they also are donor supported, and that's a different kind of engagement with their audience than the AMCs, which are on the sort of the corporate scale of that. It's an interesting question. I think it's probably one of the reasons when we had this technology, we said we have to share this with other art houses because numbers matter. And if you have a dozen art houses that can open a film, that's very different than if 2 can do that in a virtual space that's very neutral and can play any distributor, and that the art house can do their work. So I think these are important questions to how that virtual theatrical will have legs in the future, if it does at all.
Anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of words. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think there are too many options out there, and I think brand recognition unfortunately does trump everything that you do. There is a semblance of what we did in regards to pivoting, which was really not a profit scenario. It was really a give back scenario. We survived for as many years as we did in Canada because of the independent, exhibition landscape. When we pivoted to not only serve our films, we were also serving the exhibitors. Knowing that our livelihood is really a theatrical company, and airlines, the other thing that got decimated by this virus. We wanted to make sure that we were offering them innovative ways for their audiences to engage and hopefully kick back some money. So every film that we showed, we gave 50% back to the exhibitor that was, pasting that link on their site. You're right. I mean, the larger companies like AMC are going to have a huge brand recognition, et cetera. But for us in Canada, we're in a unique scenario. I mean, we have one major exhibitor called Cineplex, which essentially owns 78% of the screens across the country. That for the most part doesn't really care about art house, or art house. I shouldn't say don't care, but they don't have room for art house. So for us, to piggyback on the local brands, not a national brand, but a local brand, a small theater in Guelph, Ontario, a small theater in Vancouver, BC. These people have brand loyalty within their community, and piggybacking on that is really important because we want the communities to survive. We want cinemas to survive. But it's so important for me as a Canadian to start what we did for Canadian cinemas, because there was no one doing that. The only ones doing that here were Americans, for that matter. So Canadians, the only option Canadians had were to buy American streams at American dollars, and all that money went across the border. So, sorry, we've got a bit of an issue with the States being, the 51st nation anyways, so we're always a little nervous about the Americans coming over and taking over our backyard.
Robin, I want to jump into that a little bit later, because that is a really important thing, because actually what I want to talk about is the money, honey. How is virtual cinema, delivering revenues? What kind of revenues are coming from these pivots? Is it similar? Is it something that's going to sustain companies, moving forwards? I think we'll start with you, Curzon, because of course you have said that you saw a real uptick in subscribers even to your theaters and such.
Yes, we did. I mean, prior to lockdown, we would on average get between sort of 500 and 700 new registrations a week. And during lockdown, and as the theatrical titles started to come to us digitally, that rose to 2,000 to 3,000 registrations every week. And in terms of volume of streams and in terms of revenue, we were seeing each week we were seeing year-on-year increases of anywhere between sort of 250 and 300 and 500%, sorry, from the previous year. So it was great for us to see our platform grow and to see people who love independent movies finding us online and watching films because they weren't able to do so in the theaters, and that was great. I mean, we are. Now the cinemas are open. We're in this sort of middle space where we're waiting to see whether we'll see a drop off. But I think, in terms of the finances, one of the great things about releasing digitally is that it's a lot cheaper to do so. I think that's fairly obvious statement. Our release budgets were smaller, so perhaps in terms of volume, we weren't creating stronger grosses in our day-and-date theatrical world, but we were certainly seeing very strong profits, and that's obviously a benefit of low cost to deliver, and obviously lower cost for digital marketing. And so I think going forward, we sort of see a hybrid world where you can release certain types of movies and create access for certain types of movies online in the home, perhaps with no theatrical element or a small theatrical element. And we'd like to be able to pivot and on a film-by-film basis and be able to move between that sort of scenario and then a scenario where bigger movies are getting bigger theatrical releases in more theaters.
Anyone else? I think everybody wants to know the money.
Yeah, sure. If I jump in just a second, because I think if people are listening, they have to understand that Damian is in a very specific situation, is that Curzon has been buying all rights for movies. So when you decide to go digital or go to the theaters, and they are mostly owned and operated by you, you don't have the same constraints that a normal theater would have, and you have the rights, and you own those rights, and you arbitrate between how you want your revenue stream to come and how much expenses you want to undertake or risk. So I think it's very pertinent, of course, what Curzon is doing, but it's a very specific model. And it does work if you are in a position to go on the market and buy all rights and then make your decision ex post instead of ex ante. And I think the real question we have as an industry is all these theaters that do not buy all rights. They're just, as we're saying, they're just, Robin was saying, it's just a small theater somewhere, and they're trying to make up for the loss of their revenue. And then they're faced with people like me. People like me are there, and my mandate is to maximize return for the producers and the talents. I could, love these small theaters across Canada, but that's not my mandate. So
I would say, too, that this is about leveraging those small theaters when it is part of your model. So that the theatrical has always been the validity of a film, so that when it gets into that massive stream, that stream that is just so big and you can dip your hands in and see something, you can get in early, get out, you can see the whole thing or not. It's just so much streaming by for a patron and a user experience. And we've always seen the art houses particularly, and theatrical, you know, as an exhibitor industry, is the validator of this is actually worthy of my time. So by the time you open it with an art house, you can also, if it shows up on your on demand later, you can reap the rewards of that benefit down the line.
Tori, you're absolutely right. But can I be a little provocative here? And so I'm going to implicate John. Perfect. Okay. I have festivals for that. You know, I will promote my movies in something that's usually, and many times, especially in North America, nonprofit. They're called festivals. That's why I promote my movies in festivals. And then they get their recognition, they get the reviews, they get the buzz, they get social media on it, and then they're on a major VOD platform that has a brand and that's able to monetize that audience for me.
And I think that works as well. I think there's a different thing that happens in the psychology. If somebody saw Melancholia played at the Salt Lake Film Society and they didn't get a chance to go see it, but they see it pop up on demand later, that local curatorial kind of loyalty actually elevates that even more. So what we tried to do with At Home Arts was have enough theaters on board, in case of the dozen, to make it worthy of you making one phone call basically instead of 12, right? But to get it into enough theaters and through enough eyeballs to be able to do that same thing during this particular crisis. Now, what that looks like once the theaters are open, it's back to a call and a call and a call and a call. And I know that that's the challenge of your model, but I do think that the theaters still are going to always do the thing they did, which is validate that it's worthy of time and money.
Yeah, and John, just to link to you, I mean, my understanding is that you guys are for the next Sundance. You are also going to curate a small group of films that you will sort of connect with the Art House theaters in various cities and sort of do that virtual cinema side of things with specific films. Is that not something? And is there? How does that work? Is that something that's going to benefit sales agents? Going to benefit the producers? Like how do you see that working?
Yeah, well, how it's going to work is still a work in progress. But you know, I mean, I think you know what's relevant, and not to completely pivot the conversation, because I think what's interesting about what both Nicolas and Tori are bringing up is that there are very different market elements in some of these different areas. And one of the problems, and Tori was kind of alluding to it in the US, is that there really is not a very strong brand identity once you get into the ancillary rights windows, right? And certainly not around independent cinema. I mean, you have Criterion, you have, you know, maybe you could make some arguments that there are some brand identities there. But the problem is, you know, that creates a big challenge for the films that are going into release, as opposed to films that are going to a festival for the purpose of acquisitions, you know, and therefore seeking a distributor who then has to find a way to market the film upon release. Anyway, but I say that not to disconnect it from the role of the festival, because we've spent a good deal of the spring and summer asking ourselves those very questions. In terms of what our relationship is to the distributors, to the exhibitors, to the producers for whom who are not represented on this call, but obviously the sustainability of this ecosystem depends on their continued well-being within all of this as well. So to answer your question, Jennifer, what we're considering, and it goes back to what I said about how not to sort of feel like we're just on our back feet, relegated to a hybrid model or something like that, is that Sundance has had for almost 15 years now, a very strong relationship with the art houses in the US. We have the Art House Convergence, which happens just before Sundance every year. And I think what it reflects is the recognition that most of the films that we play in the festival find their audiences through the kinds of art houses across the country that really do know their constituent groups and really know what it is that's going to work for their audience and create that engagement and loyalty through their audience. So what we whatever we can do to help promote and sustain those organizations, I think in the end benefits the ecosystem. So what we're talking about, without knowing specifically how it's going to happen, is the idea that the festival would take place in some fashion that involves the art houses across the country. And we're talking about something like 20 cities. And obviously, so much of that depends on what the public health circumstances are in January. But the idea, and it's not entirely new, to be honest, we had a program a few years ago called Sundance USA, in which we tried to take some of the films from the program and share them through the art houses in 8 to 10 cities. It's very similar to that. And I think, you know, it addresses something that's a somewhat unique consideration in the US. Well, maybe not completely unique, but the idea, this is a really, really big country. And what is involved in creating national campaigns for independent films is insane. And so these kinds of small word of mouth events that can happen coinciding with Sundance, which obviously has a brand element to bring to that, can actually really, really help the films in their subsequent distribution. So we felt that it was a way not only to contribute to the success of the film, but also, and this kind of goes back to that values proposition that I made at the beginning, to talk about the accessibility of the films and to recognize that there are a lot of films that we play in our program that need a more inclusive, diverse audience to show distributors who the audience for this film is and how it would work. And I'm talking about regional audiences. I'm talking about audiences that are specific to the subject matter of the film, those kinds of things. And we saw it as an opportunity to reflect those values that we have at the festival, to kind of create the conditions of success for some of the films that we show. So I don't know exactly how it's going to work to answer that question. We're still very much talking about that. And obviously there's so many uncertainties, but that's kind of the general idea.
Well, you know, it's interesting to me just because this is all fascinating as a producer. And we only have like about 5 minutes left. There's still two things that I wanted to find out. It seems to me that the on-demand model, theater model, is it allows for a greater connection with the audience, possibly. Like Netflix, for example, they know their audience. Through the algorithms and so forth, they know their watching abilities and these kinds of things. Will this allow distributors, exhibitors, if this model becomes sticks with us, will it allow you to know your audience and then in some ways cater to that audience in a more specific way? Anyone can jump in.
Well, I mean, I have a bias here because I think that it's the other way around. I think we knew our audiences and are maximizing it with the pivot in the way that they might need. And that I do see that scaling back down as this sort of ebb and flow with the theaters opening happens, which hasn't happened in America yet, and particularly with the art houses. But when you're donor supported, they're also your donors, right? So you don't just know who they are in an algorithm sense. You actually know their name. You see them at your events. You shake their hands. So it's a very intimate relationship that you have with your audience. They do skew a little bit older, but everybody is statistically in the U.S. anyway, not in Utah. But these audiences are so dedicated to the art form and good storytelling. And as long as distributors are bringing the great stories, the industry as a whole will recover. It's a matter of what does it look like and what elements of it are the most successful to be financially sustainable and keep the theaters open, but maybe also have some virtual component coming through as well.
Okay. So one last question then. Best lessons learned during this time? Do you want to start off, Damian?
I mean, from our perspective, I think it's, and we're in a great situation because we're a small company. I mean, being flexible, you know, I think is the easiest thing to say. And I know that sounds ridiculous and obvious, but our industry, especially distribution, has been built on a very, one would even say, antiquated model in regards to the models of distribution. There are industry forces that can force your hand in regards to day and date releases, etc. But I think this is sort of proven to everyone in the industry that you have to be flexible about how you look at a release. And you know what's great in regards to working on art house film is art house film unto itself takes a unique model per film to release. Not every film can be a carbon copy on how you get it out. But this sort of rams it home even more so for us is to be really flexible about how you do look at the release of a film, and to be frank, also communicating with the filmmakers even more so than usual. I mean, that's something that we do all the time, but we purposely didn't make any decisions with any of our films without having a conversation with the filmmakers. It's not to say that they were privy to more knowledge than us, but I mean, in strange circumstances, you have to consolidate and make these decisions together.
Okay, Nicolas, best lessons learned.
Well, you know, I'll be very short, and I will, you know, speak also to all the people who actually are writing scripts right now, planning to shoot soon, or producers are looking for funding and money. I think there will always be a need for content. You know, we're talking about models, technology, but what I've learned is that content reigns. You know, and that's I have no doubt that we'll be coming up with new forms of ways to communicate that content, and that's what we're talking about. But we need the content. So I think all these writers and directors and producers should be reassured and getting ready for what's coming next.
Okay. Who would like to go next? Best lessons learned.
I'll just. I mean, I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Damian.
So I'm happy to go next. I mean, I think. I mean, as Robin points out, Curzon are unique, but we're only really unique when our various activities line up. When we're showing our own movies in our own cinemas in our own platform. Beyond that, you know, we're showing hundreds of other movies in our cinemas. We're showing hundreds of other movies on our platform. So we do understand. You know, some of these additional complications. So I think the thing that I've taken from this is just how we have a strong brand, but I also think that so do the movies that come through, and that's why people want to see specific types of movies. And I think that independent cinemas, whether they're a single cinema or a circuit of cinemas, are also in control of their own brand. And I think the key is curation. I think that, you know, people curate what they see themselves. They have their own tastes and think films that they'd like to see. And if they like French movies, then they'll look out for French movies. And I think what's really sort of been brought home to me during lockdown, when the cinemas have been closed and there's been a kind of a free-for-all in the home and online, is that people still look for curation, whether that's for influencers who are recommending them things online on social media, or whether it's going to platforms or websites for recommendations. And I think that's really key to all of it. And I mean, we're all, you know, all of us here, we all have our favorite movies, and that's us curating our own tastes. And that's, you know, I think that's key to everything that we do, whether it's online in the cinemas, whether it's acquiring movies, whether it's selling films to a specific distributor, or whatever it may be.
Okay. We have we're in the middle of the question and answer period. So if anyone else wants to jump in with any lessons learned really quickly, and then I want to get a couple of questions in, or should we just go to the questions? All the lessons have been given. Okay. So let's see. We have a question here that is really interesting one. So under the new emerging models, this is what we've been talking about. What is the impact on the financial deal? Like, what is the actual impact on the financial deal? And what can producers expect in terms of that will happen differently for them as they try to get sales agent distributors on board? What can we expect? I guess. Yes. Yeah.
It's not an easy one, as this new type of environment has not triggered a lot of new deals. But I think we should start with what Damian was saying before, is that you might be able to see if our distributor partners around the world do their job well. We might see greater revenue with lower expenses, and that would be the ideal, is to have movies go out to targeted audiences without having to spend so much money on wasted audience that do not come to see the movies. So that would be hopeful. That would be something interesting for producers, obviously, to maximize their return with lower P&A charged back to them, including, and I think Tori and Robin were saying the same thing in different ways, is that cinemas also, if they know their audience, whether they know it after or before, that's the question, but they also be able to maybe lower the expense in getting the audience in the theater or in the virtual cinema at a lower cost. So I think that's a benefit for the producers, and it's a benefit for us. The question is, if there's a greater risk to do all this process, then the advances will drop. The bigger the risk, the less money up front the players are willing to put. So producers will lose in that sense.
Less money. That's it. Okay, we got it. Less money. Damian, do you have anything to add with that as a
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think also there's I feel that on the one hand, you create broader access, obviously, for a film digitally, and that's obviously a good thing. Somebody who doesn't have a local theatre they can go to can still access the film. But the problem is that there's a lot more noise in the digital world than there is in the theatrical world. And I mean, one of our experiences was there was a moment in lockdown when one of the major SVOD players realized that they could access a lot of film publicity if they effectively took one of their online launches into the newspapers, and consequently that film dominated the film press that weekend, and we saw some very soft numbers. So I think that there are risks. There's a lot more noise, and if you can't target and you can't react and you don't have those revenues, then you can run into trouble.
Yeah. Okay. That question was from Furtis. Thank you, Furtis. One other question is, why go back? Should we go back to the traditional models? Because why go back when we have a chance to create these new experiences that are more connective to the audience?
I'll take that one. I would say that I was going to say in the lesson learned that cinema matters. The one thing that we have noticed, and we've raised over $500,000 since closure through donations, is that people miss the big screen experience. And yes, it was only a small portion of what, now has got a big industry, downline, if you will, for profitability, but that big screen coming together as human beings is something that people are missing very much right now, and I think they will come back to it. So there is this exciting idea that there's also a moment where we're figuring out theatrical virtual and what that's going to mean for a particular audience group, but we're also sitting on this opportunity for when cinemas reemerge, how they can continue to be very important in people's lives when they do want to leave their homes and get off their couches.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that too. It's a concern that is most pronounced to festivals, but it actually is true of most art house theaters in the US, and certainly of Curzon, which is that idea of how do you create an encounter with the work that is beyond the simple watching of it. And this is not to say that there aren't huge opportunities for films to find their audience through virtual, on-demand, whatever you want to call it. And those things will persist. I think the question is, what is the experience that people look to have beyond that? And it's a one in which there is an interactive element. There is, for us at a festival, think about what a festival is. It's a filmmaker experience. It's something that happens to the person who created the work, or the people who created the work, in which they have an engagement with their audience. It is a way in which the audience engages with that work through Q&As, through things. Yes, you can do those virtually, and they can be interesting. They're not the same. And so there's a way that the specialized films and a way that they are released by companies who deal with specialized work in the US and for that matter elsewhere, they're very aware of creating eventized event moments that create that, and that I think is very much part of what a lot of people are looking for when they're when they're looking at these films.
So one question is, are the values changing in terms of what you're seeking? Are you finding that the pandemic is highlighting director-driven films, actor-driven films, narrative? Like, have you noticed any kind of pattern or connection that's really linking with the audiences? What works best?
I mean, for us, we're an art house company, and our platform and our cinemas play art house cinema. So there's actually very little difference really in terms of the curation across the different sides. I think that's fairly unusual, I suppose, in the wide diaspora of on-demand releasing, and distributors will often see a genre movie and think, well, that really is for home entertainment, and they may make decisions on their strategies in that way. I think what I think is quite interesting, and this goes back to a question earlier on about knowing your audience and information about your audience, is that we can actually see online much more information about our audience through Google Analytics. I mean, it's not hugely accurate, but it's still helpful. And we're seeing a younger audience come to the platform in our cinemas. And that really excites me, because we'd all like to see younger audiences come and see art house cinema and develop that audience for the future.
Anyone else? Has anyone just started to think about different?
I mean, this is not long term, but I think everyone's been conscious of the tone of films right now. I mean, I think, we've noticed from some of the films that we've put out, that have darker themes are not doing as well. And understandably, I mean, everyone's kind of downtrodden and fearful, and people are looking to, quote unquote, be entertained, whether it be fiction or nonfiction. So, I mean, it's a huge generalization, but, from my understanding from the marketplace, everyone has been looking for, a happier tone to films. It's not to say that that's going to be the goal going forward, but yeah, shamelessly, did I buy a documentary on how to make bread during the lockdown? Absolutely. So, and that wouldn't be something I would normally do, but I knew everyone had a sourdough starter, and hopefully people would watch it. So.
Anyone else? Okay, so it looks like we're unless anyone else has something to say or to add to that, I think we're coming to a close on this very lively conversation. I want to thank my fellow panel. This has been really interesting for me. I learned a lot. So Damian, Robin, Nicolas, make sure I get everybody. John. Thank you very much for participating and spending your afternoon with myself and with Tiff.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.